Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns. Alan Miller and our new guest, who is one of our long-standing guests, Senator Jim Carlson. And before we start, the senator is from Senate District 51. I will put the disclaimer out. Jim is a close friend, but most of all, he's an individual that has so much of my respect simply because he is conscientious, hardworking, and unfailingly honest. And what a refreshing thing to say about somebody who has been a legislator for 8 years and has actually reaped a lot of praise from his fellow legislators on both sides of the aisle.
You know, Alan, I need to give a little bit of context on what you said, because you usually do say that I'm one of your most frequent or the most frequent guests. And actually, I was thinking about that this morning, and I'm one of probably the longest serving person that is still in office that has been your frequented guests.
That could be.
Think about that. Yes.
That could be, yeah.
So that's why I'm most frequent.
In addition to which, it's a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you.
Now, that said, this has been a really weird year politically, not only on the national scene, which is extremely upsetting, but here in the state. And I have seen more outside money. I have seen more falsehoods. I have seen more innuendo and spurious attacks in this election than I have seen in a long time. And you happen to be one of the people that was targeted. Yes. I don't know why, but you were targeted. You're running against a first-time opponent.
He's running against me.
He's running against you. You're absolutely right. Who I've seen some of his literature, and it's replete with misstatements and false statements. So, again, to my despair.
Well, we're following the, for instance, Michelle Obama said that when they go low, we go high. And that is the philosophy I'm following. I've seen the negative ads. I've been at forums where there's been a lot of negativism, and we're staying above that. I've decided that we're not going to go down to the depths here.
Well, you never have.
No, I never have.
And I don't think you ever will.
Well,
not necessary.
If you ask me, I will clarify things. I will set records straight. But I don't put out literature that's filled with negativism.
Speaking of setting things straight, talk to me about health care in this state and where it is, and some of the material I have seen where the Democrats and or legislators in general are charged with not holding up their end of the bargain, not being responsible with regard to health care. And I know that you have some statistics that belie that.
Yes, the ACA and healthcare is extremely complicated. I'm on the Health and Human Services Finance Committee, and I can tell you that just listening to the what goes on in the hearings just boggles your mind. There are so many different plans, so many different programs, so many different types of problems that we're trying to address with our healthcare system that it just boggles the mind. So then we throw on top of that the ACA. And the ACA, I support it. I did support it. I do support it. I will support it. There's one thing that has happened in Congress back when the ACA was developed and finalized. There were many versions of that bill that came out. And just like any bill that goes through Congress or the legislature, they get changes constantly. So it's really hard to keep up with them. And what we've had is the healthcare lobby has had major influences in it. For instance, the popular ones that we didn't have a public option. We couldn't negotiate Medicare Part D pharmaceuticals. When you get into pharmaceuticals, you have to pay whatever they ask you to pay. You can't go to Canada. And then what we've done too is we've isolated this individual market such that the individual market that's a healthcare pool that is not shared with the pool, for instance, that I was part of at 3M. They don't pay anywhere near what the individual market pays. So we've got all these holes in it that need to be fixed. And like you mentioned, we've had some solutions that we've offered, and at least 8 of them were offered this last year.
When you say you're talking about the
Senate Democrats. The Senate Democrats, we passed 6 of them, and of the 8, all of the 8 were not taken up in the House. They killed them.
You mean they were never brought to the floor, or they didn't even get?
Never brought to the floor. No. Sometimes these take a lot of committees that they have to go through, and so there was 1 or 2 committees that they may have gone through. Many of them were not even taken up in any committee. And now there's one that is called the Schmidt Bill, and that's the one that if the governor calls us back into session, which he is probably going to do, it's the Schmidt Bill that we're going to take up. It has to be renamed because it's a special session, but that's the bill that we presented, and we actually had it in one of the bills that came out of that went into the conference committee, and the Republicans opposed it, so it got taken out of that conference committee bill. So we have had
That really
several
at the feet
solutions
of Kurt Daudt, who is
Yes.
the leader of the House Speaker.
That's right.
And he's the person who trumpets loud, but really doesn't give you the whole picture. As I am reading the articles, and I know that some of this material is not so.
Yeah, very articulate in saying that the Democrats did this, and also that now Governor Dayton needs to come up with a solution, or Kurt Daudt says he's going to ask him to resign. Well, maybe you should look back at the 8 bills that we had, that they had in their caucus also, but they were sponsored by people who wanted to sit on them, wanted to kill them. And so Kurt Daudt needs to look back at his own list of bills. And that's going to come out, but it may come out a little bit too late to counteract some of these accusations. And we don't like to be all negative all of the time. And this is why it's very disgusting, and it's very disquieting and uncomfortable to come out and have to go back after these things and straighten them out.
One of the things I have seen in advertising is that Jim Carlson raised taxes on Minnesotans.
Yes.
Now, I mean, let's take this to its core and talk about whose taxes were raised, whose taxes were lowered, and how that affected the state.
Yes, I did vote for higher taxes, but The rest of the story is this was for the top 2%, which Dayton ran on, and Dayton's budget reflected that, and we all voted for it. And now we paid back all of our schools, we paid back all of these debts that we had, and we are now in a much better
Well,
case.
let's back that up a little bit. When you came into the Senate, when Dayton was elected governor, we were facing a huge deficit,
Right, yes,
billions of dollars.
yes.
Where are we today?
Today, well, we don't have any deficits. We didn't even have to, in 2016, have a supplemental budget that changed anything. We did because what we needed to do was take care of what was, at that time, the surplus. So we put more of it into our reserves.
Now, just a few months ago, was not our credit rating restored to AAA?
That's right.
The best it can be, which it wasn't when you came into office or the governor.
That's right. Way back in the 90s, that was a real coup to get back our credit rating. It went away after Jesse Ventura, and it actually got lowered when Tim Pawlenty was governor. It came back after, I think it was when Dayton had his first term, and then it was, we lost it again in 2011 and 2012 when the Republicans were in power and they were borrowing money from everywhere, and it's been restored now. So now we're in much better shape. And you always have to remember that credit rating determines what interest rate we pay for everything we do in Minnesota. So our bond rating, all of that sort of thing, we pay a lot less interest when that credit rating comes out favorable.
And then now it's as high as it can go.
Yes.
Now, in addition to that, when you talk about schools, paying back schools, actually, the Republican administration played some games where it took monies from the schools to the point of more than $2 billion, as I recall.
That's right.
And that had to be paid back also.
That's right.
So you can balance a budget, but you're lying about where the money is coming from. That's no longer the case. Am I correct?
Yes, and the way you take that money is, and it's really kind of complicated because there's a formula for paying schools. They get paid twice a month, and so what you did was you shorted them each month. They had to short them a lot in the beginning just to make sure the budget was going to balance, but then they continued that on, shorting them every month for that whole year, and it came up with, or actually it was 2 years, with a $2 billion a loan from the schools to the state. Plus, got to always remember that we had a tobacco settlement back in the, that would have been in the 90s, from that big lawsuit, and we get a perpetual settlement fee out of that. And that's a permanent fee, and what the Republicans did in 2011 was to sell the future value of that fee and pay it back over the next 20 years. So it was.
And we should mention that it was Mike Cerisi, who's been on this show multiple times, led the attorneys on that. His name is known worldwide.
Yes.
And got this incredible and unique settlement.
Yeah, it was about a $6 billion settlement.
So we're talking about bookkeeping, really gimmicks
Yes.
that were used.
Yeah.
And that's gone now.
Yeah. And, that there are gimmicks that everybody uses. The governor uses them, the legislature uses them. But when they're so blatant or when they're hidden, that's what I don't like. Either of the polar opposites there. And, when this tobacco settlement was negotiated, almost everyone was opposed to it. It was presented to us when I was in my first term by the Pawlenty administration, and we flat out refused to do it. We said no. And in 2011, when the Republicans were in power, they right away did it because it gave them quite a bit of money, about $700 million. So yes, it's these are the kinds of things that, they're legal, but they put the future legislatures in a pretty tough position because they're going to have to raise taxes to be able to pay them off.
And we certainly have gotten the fiscal house much in order
Yes. Fiscal
during the
House is-
Dayton administration.
Yes.
So I say to Mr. Daudt, if somebody should resign over health care, maybe he should look in the mirror.
Yeah, I don't like to be that negative about it. I guess I'd just like to have him say what he means and then do what he says, because that's how we move forward. We don't move forward by going after each other.
Wasn't a bill slapped on the desk of the legislature hours before adjournment that had hundreds of pages in it, and also a huge error that involved $100 million?
That's the tax bill. And yes, everyone realizes what it should have been. It was somehow changed, and it had language in it that would have cost the state $100 million.
That came out of the House.
Yes. Well, that we don't know exactly, but the delay was because Kurt Daudt dragged his feet on putting it on their desk to vote on. They passed it. We passed it. It went to the governor. The governor had his staff look through it and found that error, and that was so blatant that he said, I can't sign this because what it'll do is cost the state $100 million. So he said, we probably need to have a special session for it, and we need also to get the bonding bill fixed and maybe a transportation bill, but the House Republicans would not negotiate on that. So it's still sitting
against transportation so far as the Blue Line, which has been a roaring success, so far as the Green Line, which is exceeding expectations.
Yes, they are.
And now they're fighting the Red Line, or
well, that's the
whatever.
Southwest Light Rail. The Red Line is actually a bus line that comes into Egan.
well, I'm sure they fight that also.
Sometimes and that's a bus line, so they're a little less
There's another
controversial.
train line, though. Is there not a south?
Well, there's
St.
something
Cloud
called the
to-
Bottineau line, which is a light rail that'll go up to the northwest corridor in Hennepin County. And then we have the North Star, which goes up to Duluth, and we have the Red Rock, which goes down along the river to the south to Red Wing. So there's these are plans that are in place and have been in place for many years, and they're being developed. In fact, one of the Dakota County people that was in transportation, he is now in charge of that at MnDOT, and we often talk about just where they're at and what kinds of obstacles we have to overcome.
Well, with a Democratic Senate and a Democratic governor, weren't we picked as in 2015 by CNBC as the best state for business?
Yes, that was given to us,
In the
that
country.
award, best state for business. And then this morning, as we talked before, there was another recognition of Minnesota being in the top 10 in high-tech businesses. So, Minnesota has so much to boast about.
And in 2015, there was also the Gallup group that said that this is the best state for job growth in
Yes.
the country.
And we have the Pew, it was I think it was a Pew group that said that this is the best place to raise a child also. We have that. So this is a good place. People are actually developing their businesses here. And that's why it really rankles me when people say the same old thing that they've been saying for 30 years, that businesses are moving to South Dakota. They're not. We even had the Chamber of Commerce have that in their questions for us at a forum. And I said, they're not. The only reason a business would go to South Dakota is because they can't afford to go to China. That's really it, because it is only low labor. It's not looking for a workforce. It's not looking for a university. It's not looking for a quality of life.
Well, when the tax bill was, not the tax bill, but the income tax bill was passed, and the top 2% had to pay a little bit more, the mantra of the Republican Party was, these people are going to move away.
Yeah,
I
they
have
haven't.
not seen any movement in that regard.
There's been some pseudo studies, but what they do is they look at how many people that are moving away by income only. They're not looking at their age. Now, elderly people will move away because they don't want to have to shovel driveways anymore. They'll move to Florida, they'll move to Arizona, but a lot of them come back because they miss our health care, they miss our quality of life, they miss their grandchildren. So they do come back. And so this study was put out by the Center of the American Experiment, and it has been debunked by follow-up studies that this is political, it's not factual.
Now, you're not related to former Governor Arnie Carlson, is that correct?
Only by name, because my dad's name was Arnold Carlson, and they called him Arnie. And that was probably the first time that I was introduced to the governor is, oh, this is Arnie's son. And there have been times when people have followed up with that introduction, and I haven't corrected them.
But former Governor Carlson is one of the most respected individuals, not only politically, but in the state. And every once in a while, he will get involved in a political campaign, or he'll make an endorsement of a candidate. Doesn't do it often, and he's very selective about it. Do you have anything to tell us about former Governor Carlson?
Great lead-in. I had a long conversation with Governor Carlson yesterday, and we went over a lot of the initiatives that he wanted us to do and wanted me to take the courage to be able to introduce bills and to support. And I said, I will look at all of those. And he's endorsed me in 2004 and then again in 2006. And at the end of the conversation, he said, Jim, I will endorse you again this year. So I now have the endorsement of Governor Carlson. He is going to be sending a statement on it. I've been sending him things that I have been doing and have done. He's very interested in campaign finance transparency. He's very interested in University of Minnesota oversight, and he's very interested in making sure that we maintain that bond rating that he worked so hard to get.
We're still waiting to get him on Access to Democracy after 18 years, but
he did tell me, and Governor Carlson has, he has his,
he's very
let's say his demands.
He's very selective.
And I said, sometime I'd like you to come up to my office in the Senate building. And he said, no, you have to come to my office. And so I said, okay. And, that's usually a breakfast or a lunch.
What other endorsements do you have this year?
Oh, gosh. I have about 18 that I have listed on a flyer that I have. I have the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association. That is a very valuable one, and that's one that I work with the police groups.
Gee, your opponent says you're anti-gun.
Oh yes, of course. But I'm a gun owner. I used to have a permit and all that sort of thing, and I don't see that as really a big issue, other than we have to look into our gun safety. I went to a League of Women Voters Safety Forum 2 nights ago, and it was excellent. And I think what we were getting is a little bit more cooperation than I've seen before. The two people that were addressing, let's say, and I don't want to use pro-gun, but let's say gun safety issues on the side of pro, they were more, more cooperative than I've ever heard people talk about it before. Because, right now we've got 86% of the people in the state that want to see universal background checks.
And throughout the country, it's overwhelming also.
Yes.
I think it's 80%.
Yep.
Yeah. Which is not anything to do with guns or really taking away your Second Amendment rights, which is ludicrous.
And, and on that line, there's a group that is attacking me right now. They're from Iowa, and they call themselves Minnesota Gun Rights. And the executive director of it is a fellow named Chris Dorr, CHRISDORR. And if you, I'm a little sensitive to using Google as a verb, but if you use a search engine and you look at Chris Dorr, Minnesota Gun Rights, Iowa, you'll find a bunch of really interesting information about how this guy stole an email list from one of the Ron Paul's group in Iowa and gave it to Bachman, and He was the aide to Senator Kent Sorensen in Iowa, and this was in the 2012 caucuses, where Kent Sorensen wound up resigning.
Oh, this was that scandal there.
This was that
right.
scandal, and that fellow was after me. He uses me as his fundraising target, and so he says things like, Carlson is after our First Amendment rights and our Second Amendment rights and all of those things, and really he was framing this because I had passed a bill, or I was sponsoring a bill to make campaign finance disclosures correct. Just to correct them. It wasn't making anybody, be harmed. It was just to correct them. So he's been sending out these letters, and I don't know what he's using as a target list, because he has a brother named Aaron, and they do this. They send out solicitation letters trying to get people to donate to them, and they must put it in their pockets, because the Republicans in the Minnesota House last year wrote a letter telling them to cease and desist. And
Was it that's that famous letter that had about 15 or 16?
16 signatures on it, 11 Republicans and 5 Democrats, and Kurt Daudt is one of the signers of it, and they were saying that we told these people to stop using our name, and they wouldn't. And Republican Representative Glenn Gruenhagen actually had to go get an attorney and tell them to stop. So it was a pretty serious thing. And then the Republicans put in their letter that this group does not represent us, does not represent you, and is a fake group.
This all goes back to what I said as we opened. It's been a really ugly campaign this year, and disappointing.
Very much so, from the top to the bottom.
From the top to the bottom, absolutely, from the very top, the presidential campaign, which is...
I always said when I was in the corporate world that the philosophy comes from the top, because the top is what gives you the excuse or the validation of anything you say. So what we have is somebody at the top now that says that people talk a certain way in locker rooms, and by golly, I've never been in a locker room and had that level of conversation.
That makes two of us.
I mean, I don't know what locker rooms he visits, but I've not been there. And that has permeated all the way down, and is even partly responsible, I think, for the attacks on me that I'm seeing in our local district.
The partisanship is really, really frightening, and I know you're one who is happy to cross aisles. We actually will have to cross the aisle of time in a few seconds, because we've used up a half an hour already. And I want to thank you again, Jim Carlson, Senate District 51, formerly Senate District 37.
Area 51.
Area 51.
Yeah.
For joining with us. Good luck, and we'll talk to you after your election.
All right. Thank you, Alan. So I managed to not say anything about